We're going to go ahead. Good evening. No, we're doing you first. You're first in just 1 minute. Oh, hi everyone. I'm Terry Khalil. I'm the Voter Service Chair for the League of Women Voters in Detroit Lakes. Lots of fun new faces here. Thank you all for coming. I have a really simple job tonight, and that is to introduce our moderator, who needs really no introduction. Deanna Sinclair is well known in this community for all the good work she does, volunteer work, her professional work as a real estate broker, and selling more houses than I thought could be for sale in this community. She's also been a league member for several years, and she's moderated this before. So Deanna, I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you. It's good to see a great crowd out here on a sunny spring evening. Just a little bit about League of Women Voters. We are a 100-year-old nonprofit membership organization that encourages active and informed participation in government and influences public policy through education and advocacy. The League does not endorse candidates for office nor political parties. Membership in League is open to all, both men and women. To learn more, you can ask any of our members here tonight or visit the League of Women Voters Minnesota website. Just a reminder, please turn off your cell phones. The views expressed tonight are those of the legislators and not of the League of Women Voters. Tonight's forum is a legislative update on the work being done in the current session. And the forum is being video recorded and will be available on our Facebook page. So the format for tonight is a town hall where questions are being asked from you, the audience. To ask a question, please line up behind the microphone and state your name and city or county of residence. Then state the topic of your question. And so that we can hear from as many of you as possible, questions are limited to 1 minute in length, and you may ask one 15-second follow-up question. The timers will hold up a stop sign when the time for asking questions is up. And the timers for tonight are Mary Hansen and Kara Schumann, right up here. And the legislators will each have 2 minutes to respond. Before we begin our formal forum, we have Congressman Colin Peterson here. We weren't expecting him, so it's kind of nice that he showed up to be with us, and he said that he would take a few questions from the audience before we start the regular forum. So I'm going to turn it over to Colin Peterson first.
Well, thank you. I just happen to be around because we always get the week of Easter off, so I wasn't sure I was going to be in town today, but anyway, here I am. So I came here to find out what these guys are up to, too, just like you. So it'll be illuminating. I haven't been following it too much. I've been having my discussions with the governor. He and I are not seeing eye to eye on everything right now, so we'll see how that all works out. But anyway, as you know, it's a mess in D.C. What can I say? We're passing bills that are going no place in the Senate, and how this is going to work out, I have no idea. It's just, I've never seen anything like this in my time that I've been in politics. But, you know, we always seem to, when things get bad, we always seem to figure out a way out of it some way or another. I don't know how long it's going to take or what it's going to be, but some way or another we'll get back to reality, I hope. You know, they say they're going to do all the appropriation bills by June 30th. That hasn't been done for 20 years. We'll see how that works. But the problem is, what we do in the House will probably go over to the Senate, and that'll be the end of it. This will be like 95 when the contract with America and Newt Gingrich took over, and we worked for 6 months from 8 in the morning till midnight every day. We passed all of these bills in the contract with America, and not one single one of them became law. You know, spent 6 months and nothing happened. So it's kind of a frustrating place right now. I think things are going better down in St. Paul, right? That's good. They'll save us from ourselves. But anyway, I'm here like you to hear what they're up to, and if you have any advice for me and a couple questions, I'm happy to do that. Silence.
Question for Congressman Peterson. You can step up to the microphone here.
So I think that's, oh, Kathy.
3 Minnesota congressmen voted against Violence Against Women's Act. You were the one Democrat of the 3. Will you explain why you didn't support this act that passed in 1994 that provides money for victim aid and legal help?
I supported it in '94, and I have been a co-sponsor of it every time since. But they added an unrelated part to it that did not belong in the bill, in my opinion, and it's going to not go anyplace in the Senate. They added this provision to, without due process, allow people to take guns away from boyfriends. And I just am not going to support any gun control that does not allow due process. And that's what this does. It's not going anyplace in the Senate. So this bill, if it does pass, will be without that provision. And so I have never voted for this before, and I'm not going to vote for it. I'm not going to be blackmailed into voting for a bill that shouldn't be in there in the first place. So that's my story. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Jeff Tessman. I'm from Detroit Lakes, Minnesota, Becker County. We, the people, feel that we have lost our voice in government, and we are wondering, a lot of my friends and I, what about Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution, Convention of the States? Where's Minnesota's stance on that?
Well, that'd be a question to ask of the legislators.
Yeah.
We'll get to that when we.
Okay. And I agree with you. All these amendments for a certain bill that doesn't even usually pertain with it, they don't belong there. If you pass something, it should be just a straight up bill. You know?
Yeah, they've been trying to do that in the legislature, have
Yeah.
single purpose bills, and they haven't been totally successful, I don't think. But that's the problem. They have this stuff in there. You know, on our side of the aisle, they can, because of the majority they have now, they can go ahead and do kind of whatever they want. And being from a rural district, a lot of what they're doing, I do not agree with. And you look at the middle part of the country, there are no Democrats, except for me. And that's the story.
Yeah.
You know, so
I-
I'm not going to change.
I've
I've been
heard-
what I am.
Well, sir-
I'm going to be what I am until I'm out of office, and
A
that's
set
it.
bill turns out to be 500 plus pages long, and it's like all these little added little doodads to it. I can see why Congress is bogged down. And how many people actually read through everything? You know, that
Not very many.
it's got the people worried. Thank
Well,
you.
Some of us are worried too, that are there. Yes, Ron?
Thanks for being here tonight. The question I have is about health care across America, and Ron Zeman, Detroit Lakes. And the question I have is the costs have gone up so much that a lot of people, the health care is more than what their home payment is. And you shouldn't have to be working for a city government, a county government, state government, federal government to have a good health care plan that's affordable. And this last Christmas at CVS, there was a young lady had me 2 sick kids, and the gal at the counter said it'll be $300 and some. She says, well, I've got insurance. And the gal looked in the computer, well, you do, but she says, you've got $3,500 deductible. And so she had insurance, but she didn't have the money. And my point is that it's no longer affordable for a lot of families. And here in Detroit Lakes, our median family income is $37,500. So it's getting almost out of reach for a lot of families to have that. Small businesses can't afford to subsidize it. So what's the answer in Washington?
Well, it is out of reach for ordinary people. If you're not with, like you say, with a big employer, with the city, government, whatever, if you're on your own, if you're a small businessman, a farmer, whatever, you know, it's $1,200 a month per person, $6,000 and $10,000 deductible. Ordinary people can't afford that. And we have no solutions really that are being proposed that, you know, are realistic. The Affordable Care Act, I think, made some progress. It did bring down premiums to a certain extent, but the reason is because the government is paying the premiums. That's why they're lower. We have done nothing to lower the cost of medical care. We've done nothing to lower the cost of drugs. There's been a lot of talk about it, but nobody has ever done anything. 12 years ago, a guy named Dr. Steve, guy from Eau Claire, or Green Bay, Wisconsin, was a medical doctor, and he and I introduced a bill that would require that the clinics, the hospitals, the drug companies, and the insurance companies have to post on their websites and on the walls of their building what the cost of the different medical procedures are, you know, because you can't find out. And what they charge one person is different than what they charge another. You know, how far do you think we got with that bill? I've introduced it every session since then. Steve got beat the next election. But, you know, you can't have competition and you can't have a way to rein in cost if you don't know what it costs. And these people say, well, we're just going to have competition, that's going to fix it. Baloney. If you don't know what it costs, how can you have competition? You know, so we're trying to get, you know, now they're focused on the drug companies. And that's probably the biggest problem, the way they've gone crazy. You know, you'd be able to get an insulin for $1 a dose, and now it's $1,500 or whatever it is. It's crazy, you know, and we've let them get by with this. So somehow or another, we've got to come together, but the problem is what the Democrats propose, the Republicans are against, and what the Republicans propose, the Democrats are against. And they're not talking to each other. You know, and I can tell you that Medicare for all sounds great, but, you know, it's not going to happen. And my solution is, and this is not a solution, but what I think, and I've said this for a while, we should do, is we should lower the age of Medicare to 55 and see how it works as a way forward. So under that, you would pay the Medicare premium like everybody else does, but you'd also pay whatever it costs in addition to that, you know, to get that coverage and see how it works. Can't get any place with that either. So there's no answers out there, Ron, that I'm seeing that are going to actually do anything. The state's actually done a pretty good job when they came up with their proposal to have the, what do they call it, the government take over the reinsurance fund. And I've tried to push that at the federal level, but our side doesn't want to do that. You know, and so I don't know what it's going to take before people can come together and come up with a solution that works for people. But what we have now does not work, and it's not affordable. You know, and those that I see around the room, a lot of you are on Medicare, and I'm sure you're damn glad you are. You know, and so Medicare for all sounds good, but where are we going to get the money to pay for it? You know, that's a big problem. So, yes.
I hope you can hear me from the back here. I'm not sure on the microphone. So today is April 15th, which I know used to be a special day for you. Our president doesn't seem to care about the deficit. Is there any movement in Congress to try to control? I mean, it's like $660 billion coming up this year.
Well, it's not just the president that doesn't care about the deficit. I would put that blame on the Republicans in the Senate, the Democrats in the House, you know, and vice versa when it was the other way around. You know, the Blue Dogs were the last group that took a serious run at doing something about the deficit. And we worked with Bill Clinton, and we balanced the budget in 1998. Last time that's happened, you know, because we kept harping about it, and we kept pushing it, and we came with budget caps and so forth. Now, you don't hear a single word out of anybody about paying for anything. these bills, they come to me and say, well, you're going to sign on this bill, sign on that bill, be for this tax cut. I ask them, well, how are you going to pay for this? Well, it doesn't make any difference. That's the attitude out there. So so until we get somebody that cares, and the problem is, I think the voters have kind of tuned out on this, and they'll let people get by with it. So I don't know. I mean, I'm still author of the balanced budget amendment. I'm still pushing some of these things, and when I put in a bill, I have to have a way to pay for it, or I'm not going to do it. But I'm one of the few. And out of the original 23 Blue Dogs, you know how many there's left? One. And that's what's happened, And so I don't know what that's why I say, I don't know where this thing is going. I've never seen anything like this, where it's so dysfunctional. And it's the president's to blame. The Democrats in the House are to blame. We're all to blame. And there's nobody that's really providing any leadership. All they want to do is fight with each other and decide who's going to win or whatever. And I can tell them this, from what I've seen so far, you're being damn stupid to get in a fight with Trump, because you're going to come out to the bad end of it, from what I can see. So I'm taking up too much of your time, guys. You probably like this. I take the heat off you, huh? Anyway, I'm glad to be here, and thank you all, and we'll see what these guys have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Peterson. Okay. This forum was planned to be a nonpartisan forum in keeping with League of Women Voters policy. Repeated invitations were extended to Becker County's rural representative Steve Green and Senator Paul Utke. If you hope to hear from either of them tonight, we encourage you to contact them directly, either by phone or email, to express your concerns and ask your questions. We are fortunate to have two familiar legislative leaders with us tonight. Both have served Becker County during their careers in St. Paul. Senator Kent Eakin represents Senate District 4, which represents the city of Detroit Lakes and Detroit, Lakeview, Cormorant, and Lake Ida townships in Becker County. Senator Eakin is a Twin Valley resident. He served in the House from 2000 to 2012 and was elected to the Senate that year, and he is a teacher. Representative Paul Marquardt of Dilworth represents House District 4B, including the city of Detroit Lakes and the same Becker County townships. Representative Marquardt is a deputy minority leader and focuses his work on taxes, education finance, and property tax committees. He is also a teacher and was first elected in 2000. So on our opening question, which you'll each have 90 seconds to respond, is what are your top 3 personal priorities for the 2019 session? So we'll let Senator Eakin begin.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Deanna. And first of all, is it? No, it's working. Yep. First of all, I would probably say getting border-to-border broadband done. There is a proposal to appropriate $35 million each year of the next 2 years, and that's what it's going to take in order to achieve the goal of actually getting broadband, high-speed internet services statewide. And that's critically important to our rural communities. I would also say the issue of health care, which we were talking about. Something that I've been an advocate of is expanding Minnesota Care to have a Minnesota Care buy-in option. That is a top priority issue for so many people in our area. One issue that I also have focused a lot of my efforts on is the need for long-term care services for people with disabilities and seniors. And those needs are growing by leaps and bounds as we see the baby boom generation, fast approaching years when they're going to need those services. And people are living longer, people with disabilities are living longer. We have an increasing population of people who need these services, and we need to get out in front of that. So those are the, I guess, 3 main issues, although there's many others as well. It's almost like being asked to pick your top 3 children sometimes, but anyway.
Thank you. Representative Marquardt?
Well, thank you very much, Deanna, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for sponsoring. It's always great to be here in Detroit Lakes. If I had to say what my top 3 would be, probably number 1 is to get a balanced budget done on time this session. I mean, that is the number 1 thing we're supposed to do, is balance a budget. And so That will be somewhere between $47 and $49 billion this year. Second, and not necessarily in order, is to get a tax bill done this year that can match up, Bruce, with federal conformity and trying to make your job a little bit easier, hopefully. So we're in the midst of doing that. And last year, you know, when I talk about just getting a tax bill, 3 of the last 4 years, tax bills have been vetoed. So they're anything but a certainties, but I'm hoping we can get this done, get tax conformity done. And then number 3, and I could go a lot of different ways, but you know, there's a lot of local issues that need to be addressed. And one here is the sales tax that Detroit Lakes approved overwhelmingly for a new police station that Chief Todd's worked very hard on, and members of the council have worked in the city, voted that in, and so we're hoping to get that done. Becker County Museum has a $3 million request in, and we're always trying to get the Heartland Trail done. And I won't, Bruce, I'm not going to ask you on an update necessarily tonight, but you know, so it's a lot of those type of things, and you know, education and healthcare. So I've gone past 3, but it's going to be the bread and butter type of things. It's how do you help your local communities, but also this year especially how we can get a tax conformity bill done.
Very good. Thank you. I have one more question before we turn it over to the audience. How will you work to bridge differences between parties, between the House and Senate, to accomplish your priorities? So we'll let Representative Marquardt start this time.
So, well, you compromise, and I think if you look at the record of Senator Eakin and myself, we have always done that. I mean, we've always been very bipartisan, and some of my best friends in the legislature are Republicans. And so I think that helps. There's a lot of relationships that are built. But as the chair of the tax committee this year, you know, one of my top goals, again, is to get a tax bill done. And so our tax bills in the House and the Senate are going to be very different. But I talked to Chair Chamberlain just today about a thing that we need to cooperate on. And so it's a matter of personalities and a matter of kind of relationships of trust and respect. And we're going to get a tax bill done. That is my number one goal, and it's compromise. Something you don't see very often, something that tends to be a bad word in this very hyper-partisan times we have. But if we really want to get things done, and I think rural legislators do this the best, you've got to work in a bipartisan fashion. You tend to get to the metro areas, and you tend to get the real out there left and right and so forth. And rural legislators, really, on both sides of the aisle, tend to be the more moderate. And I think that's going to be the key in this session, is going to be getting the moderates together and pushing together some good legislation.
Very good. Thank you. Senator Eakin?
Yeah, compromise, I would say, too, is the top issue as far as getting things done. Some people seem to think compromise is a 4-letter word, and it's not. I know, I've counted the letters. It's 10, actually. But the fact is that compromise is an absolutely essential part of the democratic process. And we wouldn't even have a Constitution of the United States if it weren't for compromise. So we need to get a deal done in the end. And one of the things I've joined is something known as the Civility Caucus in the legislature. It's bipartisan, bicameral, so you have Democrats, Republicans, House and Senate members. And the whole purpose is to try to figure out ways to turn the volume down so that people aren't yelling at each other so much and are listening to each other. That is critically important in this hyper-partisan era that we're living in. Congressman Peterson had talked about this, but it's really the most polarized time that we're living through, you know, in the last century. We had a university professor from Minnesota, the University of Minnesota, who was involved in a study, had conducted a study on polarization and partisanship in American history. And he said that this is by far the most partisan and the most divided we've been since the 1800s, going back to. Even more partisan and divided than the 1960s. He said that people's families are breaking up over politics today. People are getting divorced over politics today. He said this wasn't, you know, as bad as it was in the 60s, it wasn't that bad in the 60s. So and I think that we have an opportunity now to kind of, I guess, be an example to the rest of the country, because we are the only divided legislature in the nation. And that, I think, gives us an opportunity to prove that divided government can work and that we can reach compromises. And maybe it would set a good example for Washington, although I think, but Congressman Peterson, I know, has not been part of the problem as far as the partisanship out there. So,
Thank you. Okay, now we are going to have time for audience questions. So once again, you can please come up to the microphone here and state your name and your residence. And if you are directing it to one or the other, please say who you're directing your question to, or if you would like both of them to answer.
Okay. My name is Mary Haney. I'm directing my questions to both gentlemen from the state of Minnesota and also to Mr. Peterson, if he'd like to take the time to answer. My topic is bipartisanship, and my question is, how can we, as your constituents, help you achieve bipartisanship on those issues we're facing? We're all in this together. What else can we do to help you? Thank you.
Great. Let's go ahead, Senator. You can.
well, thank you for that question, and I'm glad you're willing to help out. And I think just writing letters to the editor, talking about the need for compromise and working together, and just in your own community, being a voice of reason, being a voice of moderation, a voice of I guess, calmness in this sea of very hyper-partisan activity that's going on. I think setting an example by your own actions and your own words is vitally important to creating the environment necessary to be able to move forward. The fact is, we can't move forward unless we start to reach agreements with each other, and if we're just staking out positions and not making deals, in the end, nothing gets done. And that's worse than a deal. And I think sometimes bipartisan agreements are actually, can be the best solutions in the end, because they tend to be longer lasting solutions. When you have buy-in from both sides, you're not going to have either side trying to undo it later. Minnesota Care is one good example of that. That was a bipartisan program that was put together. It's worked well. It's a long-standing success. It's been around for a long time. And I'd like to see more solutions like that to our problems.
Thank you.
Well, that is a great question. And, I think one of the things is to understand that compromise is not watering something down. That doesn't mean it gets watered down. You can still have very strong principles, and it can still do wonderful things when you compromise. So I think that's number one. Number two is, I think you're going to find out, and you probably know, that we're pretty bipartisan, pretty moderate. And so I know many are more liberal than I, many more conservative than I. And so I think part of it is understanding that we're going to disagree. We are going to disagree. I'm going to disagree with my liberal friends, and I'm going to disagree with my conservative friends. But I think it's having trust that if you really want to get things done in this day and age, it's going to take a lot of things where you're going to trying to reach the common ground, which isn't necessarily going to be here or there. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things, is just understanding there's going to be differences. But when I'm approaching something that I think is going to work, something I think is best for the entire district. And I think it's kind of coming to that realization that we're not always going to agree, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on.
And I have a short solution, and that is turn off your do not watch Fox News, MSNBC, or CNN. I am serious, because it is propaganda. And what's happening is the people are listening to what they want to hear. And it's getting them more stirred up and getting them more locked in, and it's a big part of the problem. And then the president has figured out the Twitter universe that he's involved in. He's got 110 million followers, and nobody dares take him on, because, especially in the Republican Party, half of those guys do not like what's going on, but they won't say a word, because one tweet from Trump will take them out of the next election. And he's proven that. And just to give you an idea, in the last election, Trump tweeted against me, called me a Nancy Pelosi ultra-liberal puppet. And anybody believes that. But anyway, and he, sort of my opponent. And we had done a poll a week before that, and we'd done a poll a week after, just by accident. That tweet cost me 10%. So this is the kind of stuff that is driving all of this, and people are making money, Fox News, all these guys, so my advice, turn them off. Don't listen to them.
Thank you. Next question?
I don't think I have to introduce myself to you three, but my name is Ron Bradley. I'm superintendent of Staples-Motley School District. And I would like to address two areas. One is mental health. The second is special ed. Monday mornings in our school district, we have police presence, and we have students that come to school and are in transition to a new normal. And I can't even begin to tell you the issues that they have. Now, I know I just got Senate File 7 that it talks about school safety, and I see it talks about mental health, education, and different things. And I'm not real familiar with it. Of course, I look to see what the spreadsheet and what kind of money it's going to bring to me in our district. But I can tell you this, we need staff. We need staff that can listen and talk to these kids. We have police presence. They're busy. And what they come with, the stories they come with to school are just terrible. So I hope that Senate File 7 and the House, whatever that comes up, what they come up with, is that we have some room for staffing. Congressman, I just want another comment. PL 94-142, special education, was going to be promised 40%. That's never happened. In my district, it takes, our cross subsidy is about $1.2 million each year. That's about $1,100 per student that we take from general ed just to support special ed. And because of our locality, we serve students up through 21, so we have some very profound students. Somehow we've got to reduce that cross subsidy. Thank you.
Ron, I hate to tell you this, but we're not going to get to 40%. But we did go from 12 to 18. So we're making some progress, and I've been sponsoring bills to do this ever since I've been in Congress. There's people that were around at the time that they did this that say that they did not promise 40%. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but you're right. It's a big problem, and it's crowding out a lot of other stuff. So whatever we can do to get more money into that or to reduce the cost, I'm for it. But 40%, I don't think is going to happen.
One of the top concerns we've heard in the Education Finance Committee this year is the mental health aspects of things, and it is only increasing, as you mentioned. One of the big problems is a shortage of mental health counselors out there that schools are trying to find. And I don't know if there was a lot of dollars actually in the Ed Finance bill that passed in mental health per se. I think there's other areas of the budget where that's in. Second, on the cross subsidy that you mentioned, which is huge, and I think and just for folks who might not understand that, what Ron's talking about there is that special ed is mandated, and schools need to provide those services as they should, but that's mandated, and yet the federal government has been underfunding it, and the state government has been underfunding it. And so what school districts have to do is go into their regular area and put those costs into the special ed, which they should. I mean, that education should absolutely take place, but it leaves schools, I think the cross subsidy now is about $800 million a year. And so I do know that about $117 million new dollars in the House education bill was put into the cross subsidy. It only gets to about an eighth of it, but at least it's a step in the right direction. But that is an area we really need to address. But like Colin says, it's going to, even if you ratchet it up, you can't do it in 1, 2, or even 5 years. It's more like a 10-year process.
Right. And I agree that the cross-subsidy issue will have to be, the correction's going to take time. It's going to have to be phased in because of how big it is. But that just demonstrates what a drain it is on schools that they aren't getting the help that they need to pay for those special ed requirements. So and it's going to lead to teacher cuts and program cuts and things of that nature because schools have to go to their general education fund in order to get the money necessary for those things. On the mental health issue, Representative Marquardt is right. I mean, we're going to have to need more mental health professionals, counselors in the schools than we do. We actually rank at the bottom of the country when it comes to the number of counselors, or the ratio of number of counselors to students. So that's something that we need to focus more attention on because we know if we don't get out ahead of these problems early, the prognosis is not good for dealing with it later. The earlier we catch children with mental health issues, the better the prognosis and chances for success in dealing with it. And it's becoming much more apparent. Unfortunately, what's kind of drawn attention to it, we are getting more attention on it, but unfortunately it's because of some of the acts of violence that we've seen out there, some of the mass shootings that have occurred. Seems like it was the only time we got attention focused on the mental health issue. I think that's unfortunate because it tends to, taint those who are experiencing mental health. The vast majority of people with mental health issues are not violent in any way, but it's only those who have acted out in violent ways that are getting the attention. But it has drawn attention to the issue generally that we need to do more, that we need more counseling, that we need to catch these problems early with our children and get them the help they need when they need it.
Thank you. We have a question over here, right? You need the microphone?
Am I holding it right here? Thank you, ladies. I'm 91, and they agreed that I didn't have to stand up there. Thank you. Okay, I'm Marion Jacobson. I live south of Lake Park in Becker County. I have 1 year seniority on how long our farm has been in the family over Kent Eakin.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, AARP is really concerned about elder abuse and in assisted living. Now, we license nursing homes, but we are the only state that does not license assisted living facilities. And therefore, we really don't have the teeth. If something is wrong, there's no way to really address them, to force them to face up to what they're doing and correct it. So how would do you feel about that, and how would you address it?
Well, thank you, Marion. And yes, you hit a very important issue, the licensing of assisted living facilities. We are the only state in the country that does not have a license for assisted living. We do have other ways of regulating those facilities, the home, these homes with services and so on that do have some regulatory authority there. But we need to have one license that's going to make it easier to regulate and to monitor and to make sure that these assisted living facilities are providing good care and that no abuse or exploitation is taking place in these facilities. And so there will be, I believe, an elder abuse bill that's coming out to address these issues. Some other issues dealing with the Bill of Rights, putting some teeth into the Bill of Rights to make sure that residents have recourse and the ability to make sure that the Bill of Rights for seniors are being followed in these long-term care facilities. I do think that we also need to address it from the side of resources. It seems like some believe that we can regulate our way out of the problems. We can't regulate our way out of this problem alone. The fact is we need more resources for more staff. We need more training for staff. We need to make sure we're compensating staff well so we're attracting the best quality people into these jobs. These are critically important jobs, taking care of some of our most vulnerable citizens, and we're talking about people who have contributed so much to the quality of life we enjoy today. The least we can do is make sure that they're being provided with the care that they need in their senior years. So I want to address it from the regulatory side as well, but I think even more important, we need to be focusing on the resources. I think we wouldn't even be getting into a lot of these problems if it wasn't for the fact that we don't have adequate resources there. And sometimes I think an over-dependence on regulations is sometimes a failure of preventing the problems in the first place. And that's what we need to do, is we need to make sure these never happen in the first place.
Thanks for the question, Mary, and I think there will be licensing now in the assisted care facilities. I mean, I think all the House and the Senate are working to make that happen. And I do think this is a crucial time for nursing homes and assisted facilities because, you know, the baby boomers are really going through, and as Senator Eakin said, funding's a concern, staff turnover's a huge concern, and then you get the elder abuse, situation right now. And on the elder abuse, and this is a very serious issue, but I just hope we look at it and go at about it right, that we don't overstep. You know, a lot of the stories that came out last year on this were in the metro, and we know that the nursing homes in this area do a darn good job. And so I just hope we don't use that as an excuse to kind of over-regulate. You know, they're talking about some bills or some groups want to have cameras in the residents' spots and not announcing that ahead of time to the nursing homes. I think that's fraught with a lot of privacy. I mean, just a lot of things that could go wrong. But I just hope we use some moderation when we look at making sure nursing homes are very safe, assisted care facilities are licensed and safe. But like I said, I just don't think we need to over-regulate in this thing. And we've got really great healthcare facilities in this area, and I just think we need to recognize that.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Step up.
How you guys doing today? My name is Londo French. I am actually from Minneapolis, Minnesota, but I was up here meeting with a group of paraprofessionals who work in our schools. We had a conversation about budget costs, and so the last 10, 15 years, we've done a gross job of funding our schools, and our paraprofessionals a lot of times have to work 2 and 3 jobs just to support themselves. They have to, some of them are paying 40 to 60% of their cost of 40 to 60% of their income going to healthcare costs. We are injured at a higher rate than anybody else in the schools. Would you support a paraprofessional bill of rights that will guarantee 15 hours of paid training for our paraprofessionals across the state? Would you also think about having unemployment benefits for paraprofessionals in the summertime? Right now, if you're a contract employee working for a contractor and you get laid off in the summer, you're allowed to collect unemployment benefits. Me as a paraprofessional working for a school district, I don't know, I'm not allowed to collect unemployment benefits. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate those comments. I would not say tonight I could or could not support that. I just don't know what the cost would be for those things that you just mentioned. I mean, paras are extremely important in what we do in the schools, but it leads to a bigger question of funding for our schools. And they have been underfunded. They haven't been kept up to inflation, but it's a spendy proposition. You know, our budget right now is we've got $1 billion surplus, and everyone talks about how that's so huge, but half of it's one time. So you can't use $500 million of it for ongoing spending. But into the next biennium, because we always have to look 4 years in advance, we actually have a deficit, which means we cannot spend one ongoing dollar in education, local government aid, you name it, without getting some revenues into the next point. And just a 2 and a 2, which I think is probably what we may end up with in schools this year, will cost us $550 million. Just a 2 and a 2 increase. And that's why when you look at these dollars, I would need to know what would be the cost of also the Bill of Rights that you're mentioning would add on to that, because we can barely afford just doing the core functions of our school right now.
So what's happening right now, I'm going to tell you what's happening, is a lot of our paraprofessionals are seeking services from the county. Just like Walmart, we talk about Walmart workers not being paid what they need to be paid, going to county services, getting SNAP benefits, rental assistance. These are our paraprofessionals. These are the people that go every day and they love these kids, and they're not paid a living wage. They're not given health care. So we need to, I know it's a money issue, but let's really start thinking about paying the people for the jobs that they do.
Yeah, well, and I agree. I mean, we need to be paying people what they deserve, and people who are working full-time, doing important work, they should be able to afford health care insurance. They should be able to not have to go and to social services and receive SNAP benefits and things like that. They should be able to make a living wage. So I do support that. I don't think Again, there's a cost issue here. We want to make sure that we're making sure that everybody's getting paid what they deserve. And I mentioned, the counselors, how important it is that we get more counselors in the school. So we have lots of priorities that we're trying to choose from right now. What's the biggest priorities? And, one of the big ones is making sure we have mental health professionals in our schools, for instance. So there are limitations to what we can do based on the resources that we have. Now, I'm an advocate for making sure that we generate the resources necessary to accomplish these goals. I oftentimes think that it's not a lack of resources that we're dealing with when it comes to issues like paying people what they deserve. It's a lack of the willingness to tap those resources. And so I'm certainly, I think it is important, though. You provide very important work. And you mentioned health care. I think that, instead of just looking at specific groups to help with health care benefits, we should be looking more broadly. And that's one of the reasons that I'm an advocate for the Minnesota Care buy-in option, which would be beneficial to all working people who have troubles affording and finding affordable health care insurance. So that's something that's critically important. I think that we need to make sure we're looking at things from a broader perspective here and generating the resources necessary in order to accomplish the goals. I mentioned long-term care as well. I've got a proposal then to generate the funds necessary to meet our needs there.
Thank you. Next person, come on up to the microphone.
Hi, my name is Taya Patnod, and I'm from Detroit Lakes. And my sister graduated with your son. So I met you a long, long time ago. I think I was 12 or 13, just saying. Anyways, I wanted to go back and kind of touch on special education and that funding, and also the Bill of Rights for Education Support Professionals. I'm the president of the Education Support Professionals Union here in Detroit Lakes, and so I hear the horror stories that our people go through. I think funding special education would go a long way towards helping that money find its way into the pockets and giving a livable wage to our education support professionals, because that's where a lot of that funding comes from for our payroll. Part of that Bill of Rights, however, also covers us being notified when we are working with violent students. Right now, there is nothing that says we have to be notified, and so many times, because there is no prior training, we are walking into an unknown situation, possibly dangerous for us. If you listen to the news, you will hear, one second, that most of the educators that are hurt are paraprofessionals. So don't just look at that bottom line. Please look at the whole bill. It's training, it's safety, it covers so much more than just the money.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I agree. And training, the gentleman before you did mention the training too. I mean, I certainly support more training, because that's critically important to improving the quality of the services that are being provided by the paraprofessionals. So, and definitely when it comes to workers' safety, we need to put that first, and making sure that our paraprofessionals and others out there are certainly at least aware of the situations that they're facing if they're walking into dangerous situations, so they can take actions that will protect themselves in such cases. So I thank you for bringing that forward to our attention.
And I think some of the things you mentioned, every staff member should know if they're going to be working with a student that has a violent past. So, and I think what Senator mentioned, I mean, we're looking at all the employees. You talk about health care, it's not just for a certain set of employees, but looking at the whole, population overall. So I don't have much more probably to add than I did for the gentleman before.
Thank you.
Hi, Jeff Tessman again from Detroit Lakes. I'd like to reiterate the question on where Minnesota stands with the Convention of States, Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution.
So,
Stop this runaway train.
Yeah, the state doesn't have a position. There's been bills that have been introduced to do that, and that would be for the state to vote to allow for a convention of the states, so a new constitutional convention, if you would, that basically could, you could set it up legislatively so it could deal just with the balanced budget amendment or whatever you wanted to do with it. But just like the original Constitution was just to tweak the Articles of Confederation, well, we know how that went.
Yeah.
And so, or it could just be a runaway train too. So, sometimes you've got to be careful of what you may get. It might not be just a balanced budget amendment, which I know is kind of, I think, the main portion behind it, because I've actually signed on to that bill a couple of years ago, but there hasn't really been one seriously approached this year, because I think there's some things we could do. But I do think it would not just be limited to a balanced budget amendment, and how that all is struck, the devil's in the details, so to speak. But I mean, the constitutional founders set that up. And so for us to say that we never would want to do that would be, I think, going against the intentions even of what the founding fathers had thought. But I just think people have to be very clear that they may come in with a certain vision of what this convention would do, and it may do something totally different.
And I understand your concern, and I have the same concern, though, about the possibility of a runaway convention, as they call it, if it's the best way to be addressing it. I think it is best dealt with the way that all the other constitutional amendments have been dealt with in the past, which is Congress, making the proposal and submitting it to the states for their ratification. I think that's the better route to go. And again, the way that we've done all the other, constitutional amendments, except for one, I think maybe that was done differently. But we haven't had a constitutional convention since we had the one that drew up the new Constitution. And basically, they were supposed to, again, as Representative Marquardt said, their expressed instructions were to tweak the Articles of Confederation. They threw the whole thing out and started from scratch.
And they did a great job.
Yeah, they
I
did.
mean, they did, but it wasn't what they were supposed to do.
Right, and I'm worried that the next convention might not do such a great job if they did something of that nature.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hello, Bruce Imholt from Detroit Lakes. Thank you guys for coming out here today. I know you had a long day. Easy question, and then I got a comment. What's your position on the gas tax? My comment is, I drive about 30,000 miles a year, at least once a month to the cities. If you guys told me right now, pull out my checkbook and write a check for $100 or $200 for the whole year, extra $100 or $200 for the whole year, I'd write it today, because our roads need help, and especially the log jam we have in the cities. I know you guys go down there, it's tough. So I'd like to know your position. And also the comment is gas tax. We do get gas tax when people drive through our state, so they would help pay for the roads.
That's true, and so the gas tax user fee, I call it a user fee because it is a user fee. I mean, it goes directly into roads and bridges. It's all constitutionally dedicated. I think that's important for people to know. Doesn't even go to transit, just roads and bridges. And I do think we need to generate more investment in our roads and bridges. There's just no question about that. Everybody agrees on that, whether it's Republican, Democrat, Metro, rural, everybody agrees we've fallen way behind in the funding for our roads and bridges. The most conservative estimate is that we need at least $6 billion over the next 10 years. That's the most conservative estimate. And that's just to fix and maintain what we have. I'm not talking about expanding on our current infrastructure. So we need it badly. The only question is, how do you pay for it, and how do you get that extra money? I guess there's three major ways you can do it. One is through how we've traditionally done it, the gas tax user fee. The other way is taking money from the general fund, but then you're taking money from our nursing homes and our schools, which are vitally important to our communities out here. And the other way is doing it through property taxes, which is an extremely regressive tax that hits rural communities the hardest. I think when you look at the three choices, those three major choices, and there's some other ways that people may propose as well, but between those three major choices, it's no question which one is the best for our area, because the gas tax user fee does send more money back to us than what we pay in. We get back much more than what we pay in. In other words, we're getting money from the Twin Cities. And believe me, people in the metropolitan area of the Twin Cities don't like the gas tax user fee because they know they're sending money out to us to put into our roads and bridges. So that's a very good deal for us. Also, I think it's important to note that we're in an agricultural area of the state. Farm fuel is exempt from this. The biggest industry in our area in greater Minnesota is exempt. And so I think that it's also important to note that well, again, it's very beneficial for the rural areas. I guess I'm up on time, so I'll let Representative Marquardt.
Well, I would absolutely agree that a gas tax has to be part of the mix. And I would go a dime, and that would be $300 million. That would get us to half of the solution we need right there. And I think we also could find some other areas, because you're going to have to reach compromise. But the governor put out 20 cents. And I think he did that to kind of make the point that if we're going to get to the $600 million that we really need, that's what it would be, a 20-cent gas tax, if that's the way we were going to do it. The Senate doesn't have anything in the plan. So we know if anything happens, it's going to be somewhere in between. But the thing with the gas, as Kent mentioned, it is the only dedicated permanent source that's based on a formula that constitutionally goes out only to roads and bridges. And while the rural Minnesota, because we travel a little bit more than the metro on the average, we'll pay 53%, we actually get 68% back because of the formula based on road miles and so forth that's been in effect since 1956. And I'll say one more point is if you take it out of the general fund, which has been an approach that a lot of folks who don't want to do a gas tax because it's not politically popular to do it, they want to take it out of that, but it not only competes with education and other areas, but I don't think it's fair. So should a senior citizen who, let's say, travels out 2 or 3 times a week, because they're going to be paying sales tax on that, should they be paying as much for the gas tax, for the roads, as someone like you, like me, that puts on 30,000 miles a year? I should be paying more because I'm using the roads more, and I just think it's a fairness issue. And I know it's people tend to get ideological about it, where they can't even take 1 cent. But if we really are going to solve the solution, we've got to have an increase in the gas tax that hasn't been raised since 2008, and before that it was 20 years before that. So thank you.
And I have been in favor of raising the gas tax for 14 years. We haven't raised the federal tax since '92. And part of the problem that they're having at the state is that we have not done anything at our level. So Peter DeFazio, the new chairman of the committee, is a good friend of mine. I see him every morning in the gym. He's trying to put a bill together. He says there isn't going to be a bill because there's no money. And the other side, what they want to do is they want to borrow money to put into the road fund, as if we haven't got enough debt, And I've publicly taken this position. I've gotten no flack from people because they, as it was said, they know what goes for the roads and bridges. They're willing to do that. So I think we should step up to the plate at the federal and state level and raise the gas tax, get these roads fixed. That's what needs to be done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Greta Guck. I have the honor of working here in Detroit Lake as the public library director. I know I was fortunate to meet with both of you at the end of February at Library Legislative Day. And I'm pleased that both of you are strong supporters for the bill that increases funding to our regional library systems. Detroit Lakes were a part of the Lake Agassiz Regional Library System. I know you both support the bill, and my question is about the current state of it. My understanding is that the funding increase did go through on the House Education bill, but there's no provisions in the Senate Education bill. So I guess my question is, what should the public library world be doing right now? What should public library supporters be doing to see this increase? I know both of you know we've had 1 increase in the last 20 years, so I really think it's time that this goes through. So what can we do?
And of course, to do your formula change that you want to do, you need the
Yes.
new money. I totally understand
Yes.
that. So the fact that in any of these bills, and how the negotiation works out, the fact that it's in one of the bills is a good thing, because it just needs to be in one of the 2 bills to be in place in conference. And sometimes what you do is the other side may be actually in support of that, but they purposely leave it out so that they've got something to trade. Oh, we'll take it, but we want this if that type of thing. And so it's part of and just like the House, we've been putting out our bills first, like the tax bill and that. So they're seeing what's in it. And so I know when they do the tax bill in the Senate, they're purposely going to leave out things we have in our bill, even though they may support it stronger than we do, just as a negotiation. And we did the same thing, I have to admit. But, that's the way. So that's about I wouldn't worry about it at this point. It's as good as in play as it probably could be, since it's a money item like that.
Great.
Right. I would agree. It's in play. It's in the conference committee. And that's the time to probably make your voice heard among the conference committee members. There will be probably 5 from the House, 5 from the Senate that'll be appointed in order to work out the differences and make those agreements. So, and this is something that's vitally important. As Paul said, the formula change requires more money to be put in. One thing that we found for rural communities is that whenever we make changes, we have to make sure we hold everyone harmless, because we can't just take money from the cities like we maybe used to and put into our rural communities, because we're outnumbered. So if we're going to get more help for our area, we need to make sure that the folks in the cities aren't being hurt, or it's not at the expense, because otherwise we won't get it passed. And that's why it requires an increase in funding generally, in order to make sure that everyone is at least held harmless, but that our rural areas are helped the most.
Right.
So, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Go ahead.
All right. Well, my name is Katie Lundmark. I am here representing Ecumen as the Regional Director of Operations, but I also would like to say I'm here representing Older Adult Services and Senior Care. And thank you, Marion, for bringing up most of what I wanted to talk about, which included safe care for seniors. It's really important that we are funded appropriately in our housing settings, assisted living settings, as you were mentioning, Senator Eakin, but also in our nursing homes, because funding for our nursing homes in those settings and housing are absolutely critical to providing the key workforce needs that we have to clearly assist in taking care of our residents that we're serving. I wanted to talk about our 2 bills that we have, one on the nursing home side and one on the housing side. The first on the housing side includes our safe care for seniors and the regulation of assisted livings. And bringing that assisted living licensure into one license is a really positive thing as providers see it. And we have worked closely with, I'm already done. Okay, so thank you. And then the other piece is our proposal with House File 2414, which passed the Senate last week, in regards to our value-based reimbursement. And I know you both support and not supporting the proposal from the governor and from the House File 2414, and I want to thank you for that. But as I dig into it deeper, it is creating group disparity within our geographic regions, because it is setting a new precedence that we're separating metro and rural again. And it is also creating a basic undermining of our essential need, which is workforce. And I just want to thank you for supporting it, but if there's anything we can do to continue to keep it from moving forward.
Right. And
I'm done.
Great. Thank you, Katie. And I just thought, Representative Marquardt and I both oppose this cut. It amounts to a cut, $68 million from the state, but it actually is more than that, because you also lose the federal funding, matching funding that comes with that, and also private pay are going to be contributing less as well. So it's actually $200 million, as I understand it, that would be the total cut that nursing homes would experience at a time when the needs for nursing homes are growing, not diminishing. And I think one of the reasons behind cutting back on the value-based rates here is because of the trajectory. It looks like it's going up significantly, and it was, but it was going up significantly because we were so far behind to start with. So we're just trying to catch up. And I think that this is an overreaction to something that should have been expected, that nursing homes are going to try to catch up. We just lost our nursing home in Twin Valley, and it's a devastating blow to the whole community, not just for those residents and workers and the families who have residents there, but for the whole community because of the ripple effect that it has. Our nursing homes and long-term care facilities have an enormous impact on our economy. It really is an economic engine because of the number of people employed in these places, the number one or number two employer in our communities. So, you know, our other businesses are very concerned. Our school is very concerned. How is this going to affect them? So, you know, and I've got a proposal out, as I already mentioned, to increase funding. We need to be moving in the other direction. And I know some people say, well, the current trajectory in the funding is just not sustainable. Well, the current budget is not sustainable to actually providing adequate care for our seniors. So we need to do something about that elephant in the room and get the resources we need to provide that care.
So that's going to be another conference committee situation, because I don't think the cuts are in the Senate, but I think they're in the House actually is where the cuts are at. And, in a lot of these smaller communities, it's our schools and our nursing homes that are our number one employers. So it's more than even sometimes just even the care, it's also the employees and just the vitality of a community. So it's kind of a unique thing because for the most part, the governor's budget is pretty good. And for some reason, they've kind of decided to go after this part. And I think it is, for what Kent has mentioned, is these, looking at the costs and so forth, but you are trying to make up for some lost time. But there's a long ways to go yet. And, you've got the cut in one house and not the cut in the other. So we'll wait and see. Yeah, well, absolutely. No, it would be a big hit. There's no doubt about that. So thanks for.
Thank you. Ron?
Ron Zeman, the City of Detroit Lakes, and I want to thank all three of you for the help you've done for Becker County, Detroit Lakes, for many, many projects. The biggest one is a wastewater treatment plant. But I want to talk a little bit about two items. One thing is child care and the shortage that we have here in Detroit Lakes and Becker County, the lack of workers. And I belong to a group with West Central Initiative, and they said the average salary for a daycare person in Minnesota is $11.50 an hour with no benefits. So right away we have a disadvantage trying to get people to go into that. So we do need help with that. The other thing is we're looking at the local government aid formula for this year. That's coming up next year. Under this formula, we're going to lose in the city about $94,000. In the last 4 to 5 years, we're down about $460,000. And I know it's all based on what's happening with our market values, but at the same time, the cost of running the city isn't getting any cheaper, and we need that help. And like I said earlier, our median family income in Detroit Lakes is $37,500, so we need help in both those areas. And how can you help us on that?
Yes, and if I can start with Ron's last question first on the local government aid, because we've been talking about that in the tax bill. And I mean, we're increasing local government aid by $30.5 million, and yet there's going to be 79 cities that even with that increase are still losing, including Detroit Lakes. And so we have made some adjustments there was one city that had to do with losing housing after the flooding. And all of these, they're based on formulas. And the bottom line is, I think there's going to be an amendment offered when we get to the House floor that will at least hold everybody harmless at this point. So for 79 cities, it'd be about $1.6 million to kind of make sure you don't see any losses at any rate. But the larger picture, and I've already talked to all of the city groups involved, is we've got to take another look at the formula. 2013 was the last time we looked at the local government aid formula, and we think we kind of have it good. But the problem with just changing it kind of willy-nilly in the middle of things is one of the things with local government aid, because a lot of cities don't get local government aid, and there's always legislators saying, why do we have it? Because there's a lot of, and they shouldn't. They're really wealthy cities that shouldn't. But when you start messing with the formula and just doing here or there, it starts losing any credibility, and they say, well, this is just arbitrary at this point. So I'm always really cautious that if we're ever going to make a change to it, that you bring all the city folks together and you do it in a very concerted manner. But in the short term, I think what we can do, at least for this year, or the next 2 years is hold cities harmless. Because we're increasing $30 million, which is significant, getting cities back to the 2002 level, but you still got 80 cities, 79, 80 cities that are going to lose. That's, it shouldn't work that way. So my time's up on that one, but we're going to try to get something worked on that. Thank you.
Senator Eakin, you want to address that one or the child care issue?
I can do both.
I like the child care for him. So.
Well, the child care access is a major issue in our area. And I served on the child care access working group, which traveled around the state, listening to people, including not just child care providers and people who use child care, but also businesses that were being adversely affected because they can't find the workers that they need. So it is a major issue. There's no silver bullet to solve that problem. But we have to have a multi-pronged approach here. We do have to address the lack of resources through things like the CCAP program, the Child Care Access Program, or Assistance Program. And we also need to deal with it from the regulatory side of things. And Representative Marquardt and I both agree that there are many areas where regulations have kind of run amok and gone further than what's needed or necessary to achieve the goals, and actually, in many cases, do more harm than good. We see that occurring in child care access, where many good people have been pushed out or have been, because of dealing with the regulatory regime, have quit or been discouraged from getting into it. That's when it's doing real harm. And I understand, the reasons behind the regulations are for protection of children, but I can give you one example of how it goes too far, is when they started fingerprinting all child care providers' children who were over the age of 13. They were fingerprinting them, treating them almost like they were potential criminals. That's going too far, and they had to pay the cost of doing the fingerprints and so on, and we actually removed that requirement. But there's others out there that also need to be evaluated, and we need to make sure that we're creating a good environment where we're protecting people, but also encouraging people to do this important work. And as far as LGA, I guess I could talk to you about it later, but that's the lifeblood of our communities out here, so vitally important for rural communities. And we're trying to get back to the levels they were back in 2002 with the additional $30.5 million that we're trying to put into it. But that's not even accounting for inflation, so we're still way behind. Even if we get that, we're still way behind where we should be for LGA, and we do need to address the cap that Detroit Lakes is up against now, and there's many other cities that are going to be facing that as well. So I think we can get something changed in the formula to address that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. My name is Scott Sonstegard. I live here in Detroit Lakes. I have a business in Detroit Lakes. I'm also a Becker County Master Gardener, and I'm also a birding club member. And one of the things I was going to ask, I was out cleaning my tackle box here a couple nights ago, and my wife asked me, well, aren't those sinkers all lead? And I said, well, yeah, there used to be an initiative to get the lead out of all the fishing tackle. Mm-hmm. And so I went down to the local bait shop across the railroad tracks over here, and those guys don't have any jigs or anything that are non-lead or any sinkers that are non-lead. So I was just kind of wondering, in 2002 there was a big initiative to pass a bill to get the lead out of the fishing jigs and the lead weights and stuff, and it's really toxic to the loons. The loons digest off the floor of the lake. They digest the rocks and stuff for their gizzard, and if they put any lead weights in there, they'll die from it. So I was wondering, is there anything locally, or has there been any new statistics on how has this been, what they did in 2002, they decided the stakeholders, which would be the bait manufacturers, were going to try to start a campaign with education, or educating the fishermen about using non-lead. But if you can't buy it anywhere, how's that initiative can ever be successful? Do you know anything about the recent statistics on the use of lead weights?
Senator Eakin, you want to address that?
Yeah, and I appreciate you bringing it to our attention, because I wasn't aware of the issues here and not being able to find the non-lead.
Yeah.
And so That's something that, I'd be glad to visit with you more about as far as trying to do something to address it, because I don't serve on the Environment Committee that would be dealing with this, and I don't know if you're aware of any legislation that's currently moving to deal with that issue, but certainly be glad to visit with you more about it. And
Yeah, we're in Lakes Country here, and the loons are a big part of our environment,
right.
so, thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm not aware of it either.
Yeah,
so.
thank you, Scott.
Yeah.
I'm Shane Todd. I live in Lake Park and I go to school in Holly. I'm a student athlete. Excuse me. I have some questions about school security and you guys' agendas maybe or ideas for that. We've had some questions ever since Parkland about what we could do for our schools. We started locking things down, had officers in. I'm just wondering what you guys are thinking.
Yes, and there's a couple approaches, and that has really been the number one concern from our superintendents we meet with, and so kind of two approaches that I've supported and we have in the bills, and that's a great question, is kind of from two different directions. Number one is improving the security of the school through improved security on entrances, on locks, on all sorts of things physically with the school. And so there's the Safe School Levy that will allow schools to do that, kind of the physical type of things. Then there's the second area that really deals with personnel and mental health. And one are school resource officers, I think is a strong supporter of school resource officers. And then the other one is the funding of mental health counselors. And, I was talking to a superintendent from up north that said they had 25 IEPs already for preschoolers. IEPs, with many of them with mental health problems. It's just exact. So that's what I would look at is physical structure type of things, and then personnel for SROs and mental health counselors. So,
Yeah,
Thank you, sir.
yeah, great question.
thanks. And I wouldn't have anything to add. I think Representative Marquardt really answered that question well.
Mr. Heacock.
Hi, I'm Dick Heacock from Detroit Lakes. I'm here today to thank you guys for your help with the museum. I'm on the board. Maybe Colin would like to bring his papers to the museum some.
I have so much stuff, you'd have to build a building as big as you got to put it all in.
Well, maybe we'll consider that.
When I got to be chairman the second time, now everybody's giving me these big things again the second time. I don't know what to do with them all.
Anyhow,
If you guys want them, you can have them.
we've had a lot of support from the community. We've almost all of the townships have supported us. The city, the county. We're embarking on a individual and corporate campaign in the next few days, and we appreciate the support that you've given our leaders in the legislature with the possibility of a bonding solution this year or next. And I just wanted to offer my thanks because this is a big deal. We've expanded our mission to include not only the history of the community, but also science education and children's education. And we've had literally hundreds of students moving through the museum in the last few months. But I think that I just wanted to express my thanks for that.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for your efforts, and Becky has been down in the crew and done a wonderful job, and I know there's contributions being made by the city and the county, which is fantastic, and that was one of the real selling points, was all the people involved with the project and being willing to contribute to the project. And so it's not a big bonding year. I think we'll have a bonding bill this year, but it's in the works this year. I'm not saying it's not, but it's probably a better bet next year. Although if we have a big bonding bill, it could be in there. And it's in the works right now. It's on the House side, it's in the bill. But that's a $1.5 billion bill. And I don't think we're going to have something that big, but it's in that bill. But if things get smaller, you might not be able to keep it in. This is kind of a smaller bonding year, but it's an excellent project, and hopefully we can get that moving forward, or keep it
Right.
moving forward.
Right, it is a badly needed project, and I visited the museum when Becky had, I don't know how many buckets were out catching the water from the roof that was leaking. And so it's clearly needed. This isn't something that's just a nicety, this is something that's badly needed, and I'd like to thank the community for getting so strongly behind it. Representative Marquardt and I are both history teachers, so we have a fondness for history and preserving history, especially the history of our communities up here. So, and I do serve on the bonding committee, and we're going to be doing bonding tours this next fall. So I'm going to try to get that on the bonding tour. I want people to see the buckets and maybe hopefully that day, I wouldn't wish this for any other day, but hopefully that day there will be rain coming down and they'll be able to see how badly needed those resources are. But like Representative Marquardt said, this isn't the big bonding year, so prospects of getting it done this year are unlikely for that reason. It's usually a bonding bill that just deals with, you know, things more like flood mitigation, things of that nature. But next year, if we get it in the queue, get it on the bonding tour, I think that, you know, we'd be in a good position going into the next bonding bill. So thank you.
Okay. Next.
Howdy, I'm Steve Lindo from Ponsford, and I guess there's lots of issues out there and they're all important, but the environment is one of the things that I really feel strongly about, and I haven't heard much about that here yet tonight, so I thought I'd say something. I thank both you guys for your support for AIS. You know, the Detroit Lakes area here is based on lakes and recreation and the money and the funding that comes in with that. And I hope you continue to support the AIS program here. I know there's some new grants that's been talked about that counties can apply for, and that's that's getting put back into the pot, so to speak, and hopefully Becker County will apply for that. My other point here is, in the past maybe 10, 15 years, voters in Minnesota voted for two amendments, the Legacy Amendment and the Trust Fund Amendment. And in the past year, the Trust Fund Amendment and the money in there for the environment got raided. And by that I mean the legislature took money out of that fund and put it into wastewater treatment. And specifically in the Trust Fund Amendment, it says that can't be done. But it happened anyway, and it happened at the last day of the last session, and Representative Marquardt was part of the committee that allowed that to happen. And so what I'm asking for this year, and they're trying to do it again out of the Senate, take more money out of the trust fund. And so that's not what that money was supposed to be spent for. People here pretty much voted in mass to have this money available for research environmental projects. And so my question is, can I count on you two to stop a raid like happened last year and is attempting to happen again this year on the trust fund, and potentially again, you know, that would be a setup for taking money out of the legacy fund?
Okay, Representative Marquardt, why don't you start with that one?
I'll start with that. Well, what happened last year, it was part of the bonding bill. And in that bonding bill was money to finish off the Moorhead Underpass project, a huge safety concern. There were dollars for flood mitigation in our district. And so I voted for the bonding bill. Would have I rather have not had that in there? Absolutely. But I was not going to vote no on the bonding bill because of it. I'm just going to be truthful about that. It had a lot of very important projects for our area, and I voted yes on that. Now, what's happened this year is we actually took those dollars that were in the bonding bill, because there's a lawsuit on that, actually. And so we took that out and we actually passed it separately. So we've actually taken those out, and I've supported all of that. So if I have control over it, Steve, I'm I'm not going, that wasn't my bill last year. But what was in there, I wasn't going to vote against for my district. My district came first on that, and I would vote that way again. But if I have my druthers, we won't be rating that fund. I agree, it should not be rated in the way in which it was, and in the House, for sure, it's not going to be this year. I can guarantee you. It won't be done in the House this year.
And I too would oppose rating that fund, but I think it's important to note I think it was the result of frustration with not getting adequate funding to address our wastewater treatment needs, and I think that's one of the reasons people are going to things like the trust fund and possibly the legacy fund. I hope that we're able to find the funding necessary to adaid people going to that option, kind of. And Paul talked about something I think is pretty important too, is that oftentimes, when we're said to vote for something particular that is seen in a negative light, it's oftentimes part of a larger bill that has a lot of good things in it too. And we oftentimes are faced with these difficult decisions where we have bills that have, well, it's got good things in here, it's got bad things in here. Do the good outweigh the bad? And that's something that we have to do all the time. We will be when the omnibus bills come before us as well, because these are bills that are hundreds of pages long and deal with a multitude of different provisions and issues. And again, we have to kind of weigh things. But yeah, I don't agree with the rating of the trust fund for this purpose. Although I do think that wastewater treatment funding and helping our small communities out, which are really bearing a huge burden trying to pay for these things, that's a big issue as well that we need to address.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. Or two.
Good
Two more
evening.
questions.
I'm Steve Todd, and I'm Shane Todd's dad. So,
Go, Dad.
I first just wanted to thank both of you for your attentiveness to the city of Detroit Lakes, particularly with the sales tax bills that you each authored and sponsored, and then you each hosted Kelsey, Clem, and I down in St. Paul to testify before your respective committees. And I couldn't ask for any more from our legislators than what you two have delivered. And wanted to thank you for that and make sure your constituents knew how helpful you've been. Can you talk a little bit about the forfeiture bills that I emailed you about last week? I gave you my opinion on those already, but maybe you could kind of tell us what those bills consist of and what you think their chances of passing are.
Well, first of all, I think that your constituents and ours should know the wonderful job you did in St. Paul in testifying on that sales tax bill. I mean, you laid it out very clearly, and that is always helpful. I know one thing about rural legislators, when we have bills up and folks come down, it's a long ways to come. And so we even sometimes think, is it worth, whatever, but this was a bill that was really important to have someone come down, and it helped make a difference. So thank you for that. What was the second part again?
The forfeiture.
The forfeiture that you meant. Yeah. Well, every session this bill tends to come up. I'm strongly opposed, and we'll do, and I know Senator Eakin is too, whatever we can do, because we know how useful that is for police departments and that around the state. I don't think it's going to have much for legs again, but you never know. But thanks for the heads up on that. I'm not on any committee that has seen the bill, and I just don't see it passing. But
Yeah, and I too want to thank you, Chief Todd, for coming down and testifying, and it's so helpful to have people from the local communities and local leaders come down and help us with making the case. And I certainly think that we're in good position as far as getting that local option sales tax approved, which is so badly needed here. And as far as as far as the forfeiture bill, I too, as Representative Marquardt, do oppose that strongly. I think it really hurt, especially police departments in greater Minnesota, I think, which depend more heavily on the funds that come from the forfeiture. And I had one person today ask me, a sheriff, that was saying, well, if we can't keep the forfeiture of those that are dealing in drugs and so on, it would be similar to telling a thief they can keep the things that they stole. It doesn't make sense. So I strongly oppose the forfeiture bill that's coming forward. I don't think that it's got much of a chance of making it through, but we certainly appreciate you giving us a heads up, because it is important. There's so many bills that are moving. I mean, there's thousands of bills down there. So sometimes we rely on you, who may have your ear closer to the ground on particular issues, to give us a heads up about what's coming down the pike, so that we're on the lookout for it, and that we're prepared to either oppose or support it, depending on what the bill is. So thank you.
Thank you. And I always like to say, never assume we know anything as
Right,
legislators.
Yeah.
Serious, I mean, because we're focused on our committees, unless it's some big bill or on the House floor, we may not even know that's filtering through the system, so.
Okay. One last question.
Hi, Terry Khalil, rural Becker County, and my question is for all three of you. Mary Hansen, I will not stop now because this is important to everybody in this room. 2020 is going to be here before we know it. My question is about elections and election security, and it's two-part. Number one, what are we doing to get that federal money back into Minnesota for election security? And number two, what are we doing about the 2020 presidential primary in Minnesota? And are we going to have to state our party when we request a ballot? And what is Washington doing about election security, since Russia seems to be a common topic these days? Thank you.
Who wants to start?
Well,
We'll let Representative
They're doing a bunch
Peters-
of foolish investigation, and they wasted a whole bunch of money, in my opinion. This whole Russia nonsense. So we put money out there to try to help the states, and I don't know how much of a threat it really is in terms of being able to hack into the voting. I don't think that the voting machines in Detroit Township can be hacked into. So some of this stuff is just kind of crazy, that they're talking about. I think it's more important that we have paper ballots backing up these machines, and that we have that available in terms of, security. But there's people out there. You remember Y2K or whatever it was?
That was it.
They wasted $300 million on stuff to try to deal with Y2K. And this guy that was doing it was a university professor from Michigan. And I kept telling him, this is a bunch of nonsense that you guys are doing here. And at the end of the day, I was right. And they wasted the money. So, we need to have security. But I think this has been overblown. And this is part of what's dividing this country right now. People have not gotten over the 2016 election. That is a big problem. And within the Democratic Party, the Hillary Clinton people and the Bernie people are still fighting. And I get these text messages and emails and stuff from people that are still fighting with each other over the 2016 election in the Democratic Party. And that is not even getting over to the Republicans. And this is part of what's dividing this country. In the old days, you had an election, it was over, and you all got together and you moved on. Well, that's not what's happening anymore. And it has nothing to do with election security. It's a divided country. So I don't know. My position is, I'll put money out there if it makes sense, but if they're going to waste it and if it's politics, I'm against it.
well, as far as the HAVA funding, we're the only state in the country that has not accepted the money coming from the federal government, and I think it's kind of a no-brainer. If we're getting money for election security, we should be taking it. We can certainly put it to good use here. And I don't know what the reasoning is. It seems it's one person that's really kind of holding the whole thing up, and it's Senator Mary Kiffmeyer, who was the former Secretary of State. And I think that if she were to okay it, and she's the chair of the Elections Committee in the Senate, I think that it would pass easily. Who wouldn't turn down the money, especially when we're a contributor state. We give more to Washington than we get back. We should be trying to get back every dollar that we can. And I believe, I can't remember the exact amount, if it's $6 million or about that, $6 million that we could get back for that purpose. And you were talking about, too, the primary, as far as primary voting for president. And I'm not on the election committee, so I haven't been following that legislation very closely. I need more information before I could offer an assessment on what's happening with it and what the prospects are for success. But yeah, 2020 is right around the corner, so it's hard to believe that we got another presidential election coming up. So.
We have an excellent Secretary of State in Steve Simon. I worked with him in the legislature, and he is wonderful, very conscientious looking. And he's come to committees and talking about security and so forth. And I know, is spending a lot of time on the security in the state and so forth. So I'm not on the election committee, so I don't know what's happening there, but I do feel confident that if we're moving in his direction, we're going to be good, and I'm thinking we are. On the presidential primary aspect, one of the major concerns with that is, and this was passed in the law 3 or 4 years ago, and I actually voted against that election bill because of this provision, and that was, we're going to have a presidential primary in 2020, and you're going to have to declare your political party before you vote. And in Minnesota, you don't have to do that right now in a primary, never. But you are going to have to, and I never liked that. And so I know the County Auditors Association has a bill that would say it would be all mail-in ballots, completely mail-in for the primary, because it wouldn't be held in November. This would be held like in February or something of 20. Is it March? Very good. And so it would be a mail-in. People would not have to indicate if they're a Democrat or Republican. But besides that, it would save a lot of costs than all the counties having to come together and have election judges for this one presidential primary. So I'm hoping that's the direction we're moving in. So,
okay.
And Deanna, is this it for us, or do we have
Well,
more?
how many towns have you guys been in today? Together?
Well, I mean, I just...
Okay. This is their
It's number
8th
8.
stop today.
Yeah.
So
No, and I say that not because I want to be done. I want to just say a huge, big thank you. If this is my last chance I'm going to have to speak, for coming out here and attending, and the great questions, and for the League of Women Voters for hosting. Thank you so much for taking your time.
I think we deserve a round of applause for all three of these up here for taking the time to come to Detroit Lakes. And when you hear these guys have been on the road since early this morning, and then Representative Peterson shows up as a special guest for us, so that was a bonus and everything. But really, Senator Eakin?
And I just wanted to say thank you to Terry and all the others who put this together. You do such a good job. This is always the best turnout that we have of our town hall meetings, is when we come to Detroit Lakes. Wonderful questions, and I know the league is offering one in Moorhead too on Thursday night. We're going to be there as well. But this is a wonderful opportunity. We really appreciate your input, and want you to know, if you have any concerns that you want to discuss with us, don't hesitate to talk with us tonight, or contact us by phone or email. We really do appreciate your input.
I really want to thank the audience for their questions tonight, and everybody that turned out tonight. And I have one announcement before we wrap up here. Our next meeting for League of Women Voters is on Tuesday, May 21st, here at LaBarista at 5:30 p.m., open to all. If you're interested in joining or just finding out a little bit more about League, it's a good time to show up and see what it's all about. We're having our general election annual meeting at that May 21st meeting. So, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.